Hey there folks. So in our previous videos we've set up our starting player character. They can move left and right, they can move forward and backward, and we've also now got jump controls with small jumps, large jumps. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at how we can link our mouse to actually have look inputs, so we can look around our character, whether that's looking around and the character stays in the direction that we're facing, or being able to completely detach from the character and look around them as they are moving. Okay, so to get started, we're going to first of all go into our inputs folder, and we're going to start having a look at creating ourselves a new input. Now this input, I'm going to go to input action, and this first one's going to be called our look. And we'll go with look demo just because I have got the third person example content from Epic in here. So just so we can see the difference with these ones. Now the look one, by default here, as I've created it, it's a digital ball. Well, looking around our position of our mouse, both up and down, left and right, is not going to be something that's either on or off. It's going to be some kind of scalar value. If we look at these, we've got one directional. And that'd be fine if I was only doing one direction of looking around. So if I was looking just up and down or just left and right, because in that case, left would be a negative number, right would be a positive number. But we want to be able to look up, down, left and right. So with that one, we're going to use an axis 2D, which is going to allow us to have one float that tracks up and down and another float that goes left and right. We'll leave the rest of them as they are for now. And what we'll now do is go into our mapping context in order to assign some keys to that. I'm going to minimize the move demo and the jump demo, and I'm going to add a new mapping into here, and this one is going to be our look demo. So you can see there's a third person example one that's already there. Go and have a look at the Epic one if you want to see how they've done it. And this look demo, what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically start having a look at where my mouse actually is. Now in the drop down, it's a bit hard to actually go and find this one, because if we go here, you can't obviously listen for the mouse's movement. It won't do that for you. You can listen for the mouse click. But what I've got to do is I've got to go into mouse, and then you can see we've actually got three that are to do with the mouse position. We've got the mouse X, and that's going to give me just the mouse's horizontal movement left and right, mouse Y for up and down, and then we've also got mouse XY, which is the 2D axis, which is exactly what we need right now because we want to be able to track left and right, up and down. So I'm going to keep that on there. The only things that I might want to come in here later on and do is I might want to have some modifiers on here, maybe negating particular axis, but we'll have a look at those once we've got that moving, just to see if we want to kind of flip the y-axis, so moving the mouse up looks down or moving it up looks up, and we'll see which one actually comes out through that. Okay, now once with that done, we'll go into our character. So I'm going to go into my blueprints folder, character. And we've already got our movement, we've got our jumping, so let's make a new enhanced input. Remember, we don't have to do anything else about the context because the context has already been set up in our controller, so we're just adding more events. If the context is being used, then these will be listened to. So we've got IA look demo, and this is very simple. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this action value. It's a vector 2D. Well, we already know that a vector 2D is going to allow me to obviously have two values, so I can either drag off it and break it, or I can split it here to get the X for horizontal and the Y for the vertical. And what we're going to be looking here is our if we just search for pitch, we can see add controller pitch input, and that's related to the pawn and adding input to that. We've also got controller yaw. So if I just type that correctly, controller yaw input. And that's going to be our rotation around the Z axis, which is going to actually be left and right. If we think about Z being an upwards facing arrow, then rotating around that is going to be us looking to the left or looking to the right. So I'm going to just take X and plug it in as the value in there for the yaw. And I'm going to take the Y and plug it in as the value for my pitch. Okay, and let's just get all those connected, get it all tidied up a little bit, and let's just compile and test that. Okay, so I press play, and now if I move my character and my mouse, my camera will move to the right if I move right. If I move to the left with my mouse, so this is left, I'm going to move to look to the left. If I move up and down, I'm not getting anything right now. And that's because there's some other options that are set up on our character that also just need to be edited. But we do have the ability now to look around, just from the X position of this one. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to go through the rest of the options inside the character movement to see how we can actually start allowing ourselves to both look up and down, but also have a bit more independence on the camera's position to the movement. Now, to get our camera actually rotating around a little bit freer, what we've got to do is in our base character, we want to come over to our details panel. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the root of our base character here. And that's going to allow me to see anything that's, actually carrying values and variables for all of the components in here. And I'm going to search for rotation because I want to find anything to do with our character's rotation. And you see here we've got rotation settings that exist inside of our character movement component. We've also got rotation values and options that exist inside of the pawn. The one thing we don't have here is there's actually rotational values and options inside the spring arm, but we'll come back to those in a moment. So now the first one that we're going to have a look at is this orient rotation to movement. And by default, this is going to be turned off. If we turn this on, what it's going to try and do is it's going to rotate our character to face. So if I was to look and move, see there, when I move, it's very quick, but it tries to force my character to look to the direction they're moving. So as I press A to move to the left, you can see the camera tries to rotate and face that way, but then gets snapped back. Well, why is it getting snapped back? That is something to do with this one here, which is inside the default pawn options. So we've got use controller, and then we've got rotational values for pitch, yaw, and roll. If I turn off the yaw one, this means that my controller itself is not responsible for controlling the actual rotation on the yaw, so spinning round our character. And now you can see as I press these buttons, so I'm pressing D to move to the side, and press A to move the opposite side, you see my character rotates around to face the direction that they're moving in. So orientating their rotation to face their movement. The only problem is that now that I'm facing this way, what should be forward for my character is not actually forward in terms of their movement. So if I press W, you'd expect the character to move forward, but instead they move to what is the controller's forward facing one. That's because we've got the control rotation when we do our movement. If you want it to be a little bit different, don't use control rotation for our movement, but we can still fix this a little bit. And there's one more option we need to do, and that one exists inside of the spring arm. So we're going to detach our spring arm here and instead tell it to use the pawn control rotation. And what this is going to allow us to do now is it's going to allow us to detach it from our character. There you go. So you can see I can actually move my rotation of looking all the way around my character. And if I move forward, this is W. If I face this way, W is going to move me in the rotation that I am looking. So you can see now I've got the ability to rotate my character independently, look around them, look up and look down. And that's going to give me a lot of control when it comes to making, platformer games. You might want to restrict some of these if you want something that's a bit more fixed on the forward facing. And we probably don't want to be able to look all the way up and all the way down like that. So in a moment, what we'll do is we'll restrict some boundaries on how far up and how far down we can go. But just there, we've now got a freely rotating camera that allows it to go all the way around our character. Now, a couple of other things we might want to have a look at here. We might want to have a look at different combinations of those. So you can see here, I've got this use pawn control rotation. What we could also look at is if we didn't have the rotation to movement on. So if I turn off the orient rotation to movement and I just leave the pawn control rotation on just the spring arm, what you can see now is I rotate around, and if I move, it still moves forward for what is forward and backward for this character. Yeah. And that's going to be useful for maybe if I want to spin them around. See, the character itself doesn't actually rotate and face. And that means if I move forward, it's wherever that one's facing. This might be useful if you want to start detaching the rotation and putting it onto separate input keys. So if you want the vehicle potentially, or something, a spaceship, and you want it to actually rotate around when you press a particular key, then you might want to only have forward and backward linked to their keys and detach the pawn control rotation for the spring arm so you can freely look around. Now, the final little fix that we're going to do on this is just to remove the ability for our character to end up looking directly up and down on our on our actual character as we're moving around. So I'm going to set some kind of clamp so I can try and restrict it so that my player can never move the camera maybe below there, and if they're going this way they can never maybe move it above there, just to give a little bit more restriction on that. Now to do that, we could do it inside of the character themselves, but the actual thing that we're looking for is the player camera manager, and that exists inside of our controller. So you could get it from inside of the base, inside our character. Our base character is set up. You could do get player controller and get it from there. I'm going to go into the actual controller itself, and I'm going to do these edits inside of here. So we've already got our mapping context. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a sequence node, so I can basically do these as individual steps. So the first step that I'm going to do with the sequence node is I'm going to set up mapping context. And this might be where you want to take this sequence and say, okay, well, this first one, this is input mapping. So I could put a comment on that, input mapping. And then this second sequence node, so after that's been done, the next bit I'm going to do is going to be my camera. And to do that, what we're going to do is go for the player camera, and we're going to get the get player camera manager. Now here, I'm going to get this one right at the bottom that gives me a reference to the player camera manager. And off of this, I can drag and I can set the view pitch. Now remember, pitch is our looking up and down, and I can get it, but I'm actually going to set it. So I'm going to set the minimum, and let's also have a look for set view, and we'll go set view pitch max. Notice you can set these for the other rotational values as well if you did need to, but we're just doing this right now just for a rotation for up and down. Okay, so now that that's done, what we could do is we could type in some numbers in here, but what I actually like to do is just start thinking about controlling some of these elements inside of variables. So we'll set this one to be cam view pitch min, and the next one I will make as well. If I right click there, promote to variable, we'll go with cam view pitch max. Now, what kind of values actually work here? Well, those are going to be up to you to kind of experiment. But there are some values that I've found, or some regions of values that actually do work quite well. So the minimum works quite well at a value somewhere between -50 to -75. So let's just start with -50. And let's just come over here to test this out. And if I go in, you can see I can go up to there. I can't go any higher, any lower than that. But if I go up to there, that's what -50 is. Kind of looking down at the floor in front of the character. So let's just test that one more time with, instead of -50, let's go with -75 instead and see how that one works. So we come into here and I look up, and you can see I'm pretty much looking directly down on my character now. So we've got a value that exists somewhere between here to here. Now, obviously, if you go with lower, you can restrict yourself. You know, this is probably around 20, 30, and your character can never go any higher or lower than this. But it depends, you know, what type of game are you actually running on? Do you want the character to be able to look down over the edge of something? This is a completely flat floor as I'm testing this, but if I was to maybe move up here and have a look, you know, what do I want my character to be able to do? Do I want them to be able to look down over the edge of the actual, you know, cliffs or any jumps they've got to do to see where they're going? Okay, so that's -50 to -75 when it comes to the minimum. And on the maximum, what we're looking at is something between 0 to 15. And if you've already looked, you know, you saw 0. 0 meant that as I was pressing play, I couldn't move it any lower than that kind of waist view. So this is exactly the pitch that it starts at. That is the default, and it won't let me go any lower. Whereas if I was to go and maybe set this to be a value of 15, this is going to give it a little bit more movement. And you can see I can kind of look up just a little bit here. Not too much, but obviously you can go higher with that if you really want to. So let's just test this out at 25. And the higher you get, the closer that you get for this camera going into the floor. So 25 there, you can see, is pretty much down on the floor and looking up. Now, as we're actually able to move our camera around, one of the things you might also be noticing is that if I stand here and I move along, notice that my camera snaps in as I'm looking around. And that can be quite disorientating and annoying. And that actually happens because the camera that's inside of our character here is attached to this spring arm. The spring arm, the spring bit of the actual name of it, what that means is that if it's drawing a line between the camera and the thing it's attached to, so over here the mesh, if something gets in the way of those, so if we visualize it here, if something gets in the way of this line, what will happen is this camera will move down here, the spring arm will get shorter to allow the camera to still be able to see that thing. Now, if you want that to stop happening, one of the easy things you can do is just in the spring arm options over here, you can just tell it to not do a collision test. That's really useful. We mentioned this before, but really useful in things like 2D and side scrollers, anywhere where you've got something that could go in front of your character. Whereas on a third person game, or somewhere where we've got a fixed camera, maybe we don't want it to keep on moving in and out. So I'm just going to turn that off just for a moment. And if I press play here and show you, this means that if I move closer to here, I can end up with things in front of my view of the character, and the spring arm doesn't actually change its size at all. This just means that you're going to have to now consider what could appear between your view of the character, and making sure that you don't let them get too hidden away from view. Okay, so that's our looking controls. With this now, we've got a restriction on looking up and looking down. We've got ability to potentially set up looking all the way around our character. Depending on what options we've got when it comes to our rotation, we can tell our character to rotate to the direction that they're moving. We can obviously come over here, tell that one to rotate the character mesh to the direction that they're moving, and we've got the options of whether we control it through the controller rotation or through the pawn rotation through the spring arm. So you can see here now I've got lots and lots of control over the looking of this character, and you can now actually start comboing all these different things together to get the right look and feel when it comes to your character for things like moving, jumping and looking. Thanks for watching, folks. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider subscribing to access more of my Unreal Engine content.